All right. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, or evening. So I'm going to go ahead and go over the rest of this section. I did a video on plants and, plant reproduction and all that. So if you haven't watched that, I recommend going back over that because I kind of touch on all the major topics. As far as your EOC goes, there's a few extra things on there I didn't go over that's on your test, but not on your EOC. So this is going to kind of concentrate on just, classification in general, and then all the different kingdoms, because that's, pretty much what you're going to be asked about in this section. So classification in general. Um, so let's start with the Linnaean classification system. You have all the different levels of taxa. Make sure you know the order of these. Make sure you know that the higher up, it includes more organisms. The further down, it's more specific. And then the last two levels of classification, the genus and species, that's your scientific name. You just put them together, that's your scientific name. Also what we call binomial nomenclature, which is just a two-name naming system. That's what that means. All right. And then one of your assignments, you already had a cladogram. You had to, I think you had to pick either insects or birds, and you had to make your own. And really, it didn't matter how you made it, as long as there was some sort of logic behind it, your organization. All right. And then some things I want to touch on that's going to be on your test, and that I'm probably going to ask you about on your DBA. In terms of classification, make sure you know, like, there's a lot of like the history of classification and how things have changed and how we've added different domains and how we've changed the way we classify organisms. And all of the reason for changing is because of a couple of reasons. The big one is new technology. Specifically, you have microscopes and you have DNA analysis. So you compare the DNA of multiple organisms to see how related they are, and it gives you a lot more accurate. This is always DNA, molecular evidence is going to be given the last word by scientists on how to classify organisms. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right. As far as the six kingdoms go, before we get into that, couple terms you need to know. Autotroph or producer is the same thing as a heterotroph and consumer. So autotrophs, um, I'm sorry, an autotroph or a producer are the same thing, and then heterotroph and then consumer are the same thing. So your autotroph, your producer, think of them as producing their own food or automatically making their own food. And this isn't just photosynthesis. This could be other processes too, such as chemosynthesis, which is using chemicals to make their own food. But primarily in this class, we're talking about photosynthesis and plants and phytoplankton, things like that. And then, of course, you have your heterotrophs or your consumers. They have to consume, they have to get their own food. Um, all right, so let's start with the first two kingdoms. You have eubacteria and then archaeobacteria. These are both your prokaryotes. So because they're prokaryotes, they're both bacteria. They're both going to be unicellular or single-celled. Um, and they're starting with eubacteria. This is your typical bacteria. This is your most common bacteria. For the most part, they need oxygen or they're aerobic. They can cause diseases. Again, just think of this as your typical bacteria. Nothing too special about them. They're everywhere. Okay, and then your other kingdom of prokaryotes is going to be your archaeobacteria, and really the best way to remember this is they can live in extreme environments. So this could be, extreme heat or extreme, acidity, um, you name it. And the reason they can survive in these extreme environments is because their cell wall is a little bit unique and allows them to survive there. All right, the last four kingdoms we're going to talk about are going to be your eukaryotes. So, eukaryotes, think back to a eukaryotic cell. These can be, most of them are multicellular. There are some single celled or unicellular ones. Of course, they have a nucleus, unlike the prokaryotic ones. The bacteria don't have a nucleus. So starting with protista, they're going to be unicellular. Okay, that's one of the easiest ways to remember them. So think of like amoebas. Amoeba would be an example of a protista. And basically they have some features of plants, some features of others, and then they lack some. So they don't really fit quite as a plant or an animal or somewhere else. But usually what gives it away is that it's unicellular and it's a eukaryote or, yeah. All right. Okay, next we have our fungus. So these are going to be like your mushrooms, things like that. Okay, a lot of common misconceptions. Usually students think like, oh, a fungus is it's like a plant, so it photosynthesizes, it needs the sun. No, they're decomposers. So they basically absorb dead stuff in the ground. They're heterotrophs. Okay, um, they are multicellular. For the most part, they're multicellular. And then what makes them different from a plant, other than the fact that they're not photosynthetic, is that their cell wall is made of chitin and not cellulose. Plants' cell wall is made of cellulose, and then the fungi is not made of cellulose. It's made of the chitin. All right, and then we have our animal kingdom. I'm actually going to go back to that in a second. So plant kingdom, like we said, cell wall autotrophs, they're multicellular, cell walls made of cellulose. Okay, so that's a big thing. Really make sure you know the difference between a plant and a fungus. So you're going to probably ask that on your test, and I'm probably going to ask you something about that on your DBA. All right, let me go back to animals. Now, this your class here, it goes into a little bit more detail on animals than I do in a normal biology class because, I'm just kind of basing what's on your EOC. That's generally kind of what I teach too. So there's a little bit more here. So I might not go into as much detail. Um, but animal kingdom, again, generally multicellular, heterotrophs, mobile or motile, meaning they can move around. And then of course there's no cell wall, some kind of extra stuff in there. And it's not too difficult. So like, make sure you know vertebrate versus invertebrate. So vertebrates basically have, some form of backbone. Invertebrates do not. So an invertebrate would be, like a turtle or a jellyfish or coral. And then vertebrates would be, like a dog or a fish, something like that. Make sure you know the difference between ectothermic and endothermic. So ectothermic is basically, cold-blooded animals, and then endothermic is basically warm-blooded animals. So, all right, that's pretty much it. I'm just taking a quick look at my little review guide I made for you guys. All right. Okay, that's everything. Again, there's a little bit more detail. Obviously, I went through kind of quick, but I touched on the very important points. So, as far as your DBA goes, make sure you know like archaeobacteria versus eubacteria. Make sure you know about fungus versus plants, and then also fungus. Make sure you know they have a special form of RNA. Um, make sure you know. Oh, virus. We didn't really talk about a virus yet. So make sure you know why a virus is not considered a living thing. Basically, because it cannot reproduce without a host. Um, and okay, and then a little bit on amoebas. Make sure you know how amoebas eat through endocytosis is the process where they eat. All right. Okay, but other than that, that's everything. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. And just a reminder, you're welcome to finish up this course as soon as you'd like. I will help you as much as you need it.